So today we will be making a return to the X299 Dark in a form of CPU upgrade. So currently the CPU that is in the socket is the Tencore 7900X that was used in the Tencore category records video where I did almost 6 GHz for Cinebench and all that. We will be replacing the CPU with the new and just released Core i9 9980XE 18-core Extreme Edition CPU. I personally think that this whole Skylake X refresh launch is pretty useless, as the CPUs are pretty much identical to the original product SKUs. They only have a small bump in the stock frequencies, and they have a soldered IHS instead of using normal thermal paste between the CPU die and the IHS. So this might be a plus for sub-zero overclocking. It might be a minus for normal air or water cooling, where you can use liquid metal. But anyways, so we can take the CPU out. Here you can see the CPU. Actually, I managed to do the best cooler mount ever with this IHS during the record video. So I've never managed to do so good cooler mount with any other CPU and platform. You can really see it from the thermal paste spread in the pictures. So I can happily recommend the custom IHS from Barks. It's definitely worth it for the Skylake X when it only costs like 25 euros if I remember correctly. So go check that out. So here are the two 18-core CPUs. This is the 7980XE, this is the 9980XE. So there's pretty much no difference between the two. The 7980XE is also with custom IHS at the moment. Here you can also notice that I have lapped the 9980XE. Of course, someone now thinks that I'm idiot by lapping so expensive CPU, but anyways, I did it. I did it first with 400 grit sandpaper, then 800, and then I finally polished the CPU with 2000 and 6000 sandpapers to really make it like almost like mirror. So yeah, we will be testing the CPU out on the X299 Dark, see how well it overclocks, how are the temperatures, does it do a better result than the 7980XE on water, and also test the memories to see is there any improvement on the IMC, can we reach any better daily type memory speed. So and then wrap it on a conclusion, as the price of the CPU as well as the older 7980XE is still at the 2000 euro mark, so it is definitely not a cheap product. But yeah, without further ado, let's mount this whole motherboard to the test bench and then get into the BIOS and see how it looks like, and then do some overclocking tests with the CPU. So the first thing you see when you enter the BIOS is obviously the welcome screen. So we can enter the BIOS by pressing F12 on our keyboard. The X299 Dark BIOS is very easy to use, it's very straightforward, and it's quite similar to other EVGA motherboards. So the first tab in the BIOS is the overclocking section. Here are all the settings for the CPU core and mesh overclocking, as well as most of the voltages. I'm also using the old beta BIOS from May 2018, which has been the best BIOS so far. It had some improvements on the mesh overclocking, as well as some power issues fixed for LM2 overclocking. And we can still use that BIOS even with the 9980XE, so that already shows that the new Skylake X refresh CPUs do not need a BIOS update, pretty much. So they are pretty much identical to the original product SKUs. But anyways, so when we want to overclock the CPU, we go to the CPU multiplier control and set it to either ratio limit or per core. Ratio limit means that it will run the same overclock multiplier on each of the CPU cores, no matter how many of them are being used. Per core, overclocking is for using a different multiplier for different scenarios, so you could use a higher multiplier when only 1 or 2 threads are being used, and a lower one when all of the cores and threads are being used. Ratio limit is very good for just overall testing. I recommend you start at 4.4 to 4.5 GHz, as these CPUs really get hot very fast, and they aren't easy to cool at all. But since my water cooling is already very strong and I have the CPU lapped, I will start with 4.7. The best CPUs will do 5 GHz for something like Cinebench with reasonable voltage with normal ambient based water cooling. But obviously 5 GHz is very hard to achieve even just for Cinebench. Mesh, the mesh or the cache, it is a little bit different on the X299 compared to the mainstream socket. On the mainstream socket the cache doesn't affect temperature that much, but on X299 socket the mesh can actually have higher impact on performance than the actual core in some situations. One example is Intel's XTU benchmark. There an increase on the mesh can actually boost the score more than one bump on the actual core speed. Most of the CPUs will do 3.2 to 3.3 GHz with reasonable voltage of 1.3. For water cooling, the mesh voltage doesn't affect temperatures that much, so even 1.3 is very suitable for daily use. We will use a setting of 3.3 here. The AVX negative offsets are very handy, so you can use a lower CPU multiplier for programs that can use the AVX instruction sets, as those programs will make the CPU to consume a lot more power, which results in much higher temperatures. So this is a good way to compensate that increase in heat by running a lower multiplier for those programs. A good value here is from 1 to 3. And it's very recommended you use a value here. There is a different multiplier for AVX2 and AVX3. The newer can obviously draw even more power than the older AVX2, and then it means that it can get even higher temperatures. So I recommend you use a value of 1 to 3 here at least. You can even use 0 for testing purposes, like I will here. But that means that you have to overclock the CPU on the AVX stability rules or by its limits. So you'll have to run a lower multiplier in general when you could run a higher one for non-AVX situations. Extreme cooling mode and extreme voltage mode, these are mainly for sub-zero overclocking, obviously. But if you are doing some heavy memory testing, even on air or water cooling, and if you want to use, let's say, if you want to use a memory voltage that is higher than 1.6, then you have to enable the extreme voltage mode if you want to use, let's say, 1.8 to even over 1.9 on the memory. CPU VIN, aka the input voltage, this is the only voltage that goes from the CPU vCore VRM to the actual CPU. Then all the other voltages are then split from this one voltage inside the CPU thanks to the integrated FIVR. A good voltage value on normal like daily use is from the stock 1.8 to 2.1. Some CPUs like higher input and some don't like it at all. So I recommend that you start with a value that is close to the stock 1.8, and then later on you can try to see does a higher value like 2.1 yield you anything. Some CPUs might even just go worse, so like the vCore requirements for some specific overclock will actually go up when you increase the input from, let's say, 1.85 to 2.1. The overall guide is that the input should be at least 400 millivolts higher than the actual vCore, so you can use that as a guide. We will use a value of 1.8 here for now. CPU vCore and vMesh, for both of these I recommend that you use override or the fixed setting for starters and find your suitable daily speeds that way. Then later on, when you have found a good setting for both of them, then you can change it from override to adaptive, so you can make sure that the voltages drop when the CPU is just on idle. So we will be just using override, and I recommend that you start with a value of, let's say, 1.15, as the CPUs really go hot very, very fast, especially the 16 and 18 core CPUs, even with good water cooling. But since I already have very good water cooling and I have the CPU lapped and I have already tested the 7980XE, I will use a setting of 1.25 here. And on the vMesh I will use 1.3, as I already said. This doesn't affect temperatures that much, so you can even use a value of 1.35 if you are like on the edge on achieving, let's say, 3.4 GHz on the mesh. When it comes to vCore, you cannot use a value of over 1.35, even with very strong water cooling. I mean, for non-AVX situations as well. So please proceed carefully with these voltages. Win vDroop, aka the input vDroop. If you want to enable load line calibration for the input voltage so that the voltage doesn't drop when the CPU gets some load, set this option to disabled. Then you have enabled load line calibration for the input voltage. VCCSA and VCCIO, these are mostly for memory overclocking. However, the external system agent voltage isn't that important on the Skylake X CPUs, as it's not so present with them. So you can use the same value as on VCCIO on it. The setting, I mean, the voltage that is important for memory overclocking on Skylake X CPUs is the internal system agent offset. On the dark it is called uncore voltage offset, but the naming isn't the best in my opinion, as this only has to do with memory, not about mesh. So for VCCSA and VCCIO, use a voltage from, let's say, 1.15 to 1.25 on them. VCCIO does have some impact on mesh overclocking as well. So for example, on LN2 I always set this to like 1.35. It does give a little like a boost in mesh stability. PCH, leave it at auto or set or manually type in the stop value is my recommendation. So the internal system agent offset, you do need a value of, let's say, 300 to 400 plus if you want to run 4 sticks of memory at the speeds of excess of, let's say, over 4000 with good timings. It's impossible to say what is like the maximum safe value for like daily use, but I have used 450 just fine for testing purposes. So you can use, let's say, 400 for starters, and when you have found your good memory configuration, then you can just try to come down in this voltage and see where the stability ends, like where it becomes unstable, and then just go back a little bit. But yeah, just use 400 here. So that's pretty much it for the overclock section of the board BIOS. So the next tab is the memory. In the first part we can choose between automatic, manual, and either of the XMP profiles. But we will set all the things manually, of course. Then we can choose the memory multiplier. We will use a multiplier of 4000 with a voltage of 1.45. You can use the DRAM voltage up to 1.5 very safely anyways. Then we use a relatively good timing configuration of 17, 18, 18, 28 and common rate 2. The main and secondary timings are pretty much the same on X299 and on the mainstream socket, so you can use like the common rules here, so like 23 on the 4-active window and cache write latency of 14. And on the secondary timings part, you can use 10 to 14 on the write to read command delay, 360 on the TRFC. When it comes to the write to read command delay, I would leave these at auto. These are linked to the cache write latency as well as on some of the third timings, so I, at least for starters, leave these at auto. And lastly, there's the TCKE, set a value of 4 to 6 here. But yeah, the third timings are different on X299 compared to the mainstream socket. So for starters, leave all of them at auto. Then you can later on you can manually try them one by one and see how you can fine tune them. You can tighten them down a lot, but it's not so easy and fast thing to do. Then at the bottom of the memory section you can find ODT and RTL configuration. You can just leave everything there at auto. They aren't so important and the auto rules are just fine. The advanced tab holds all the main feature settings and CPU section. I mean CPU features and so on. So in CPU configuration we could disable speed step, C states, hyperthreading and so on. I generally do not even disable speed step or the C states, as I do want the CPU to go down in core speed when it's just sitting on the desktop. In SATA configuration we can choose between A8 CI and RAID. There's nothing really else that's important. Onboard device configuration, we could disable some of the main features of the board like LAN or audio. You might want to disable these if you are doing some heavy overclocking tests, but yeah, when it comes to daily use, just leave them at auto or enabled. In the hardware monitor configuration, here you can find all the fan settings, the debug LED, monitoring settings and so on. If you want to make sure that the VRM temps are the best possible at all times, then I recommend you use some manual setting on the power fan option. Like you could change it from smart to max. Of course then the small fans do become audible, you can clearly hear them, and it might be a little bit annoying. That's why monoblocks are quite popular on X299, as the VRM is very tightly packed between the memory slots, and since the CPUs draw a lot more power than mainstream CPUs, there is obviously some seeable heat load there. So even with the small fans at maximum, the VRMs can get really hot during long stress tests or like rendering use if you have the CPU overclocked anyways. So the debug LED options are under the 80-port mode configuration. If we enter it, we can choose, I mean if we want to use the debug LED, we have to change the mode from BIOS only to sensor 1 or sensor 2 or then combined. I will use sensor 1. Really the important ones here are either CPU die, if you are using, if you are on LN2 for example and you want to know the exact actual CPU die temperature, then you should be using the CPU die. But we will be using the CPU VRM option here, as we will be stress testing the VRM by running something like Cry95 on the CPU for a good amount of time. Then we can just go to the next tab, which is the boot section. Here you can find Windows 7 installation again, obviously. You have to enable this if you want to install Windows 7 or older and you are using USB mouse and keyboard. This option will give the most basic level of compatibility for USB devices, so you can use the mouse and keyboard like as if they were PS2 devices. You cannot use USB sticks with this enabled. You cannot read any files from USB sticks. So, and this will also lower your overall performance. So if you install Windows 7, please remember to install Intel and ASMedia USB drivers straight away so you can disable this again. If you are using PS2 mouse and keyboard, you can install Windows 7 from a DVD without even enabling this. And then boot mode select, I always change this from UEFI to Legacy. UEFI isn't even supported with Windows 7 or older anyways. And then at the bottom we can choose which hardware, which hard drive we want to boot and so on. But we don't have anything else plugged in but the Apacer 240GB SSD. And then once we have everything set up, we can just go and save the profile to one of the empty slots. So after that we can just save the settings, go into the OS and start testing the CPU, how well it overclocks and how well we can tune the memory. So 4.9 was stable in Cinebench R15 with a vCore of 1.29 if I used a low input voltage. When I tried 2.1 first, it actually went worse. So with 2.1 input, the vCore requirement for 4.9 was at around 1.33 to 1.34, and when I tried very low input like 1.9 or even 1.8, it could pass 4.9 with around 1.29. It's quite good result. Sadly, 5 GHz isn't easy to achieve as the temperatures already go very high. I really would like to see the 5 GHz barrier broken, like it is doable on the best chips out there, but really it doesn't seem to go through. So here I can do a 4.9 GHz run as an example. So the temperatures really raise a lot. I mean, really raise fast by a lot. So the temperature ranges from 66 to 89 degrees. So the variation is quite high. It would be more stable if I was on liquid metal, but since the CPU is soldered, that is not possible. Although the overall result is quite good. So now I'm using a voltage of 1.34, and it's really, I mean, those are really hot temperatures, so I wouldn't use something, I mean, a voltage like this for daily use. 5 GHz wasn't passing, so here we can now try how well we can do. So if I now set 493 with the Elite software, we can see if it's still stable. When you test the mesh, you can obviously see when it hangs. The clear difference between a cache failure and a core failure is that if your cache or the mesh is unstable, you usually cannot reset. So when you try to press this reset button, nothing happens. You have to press power button to power down the system and then power back on. But with a core crash, you can almost always reset the system. So that's the difference. Some CPUs might do 3.4 mesh with just 1.3 volts, so you have to test that yourself. But now, if we try to run 4.93 on the CPU, we can see if it's still stable with 1.8 input and 1.3 for vCore. It seems to pass. Yeah, 4941 was the score, and the temperatures were pretty much the same. 90 degrees has been the hottest temperature on the third last core, so it is really hot temperature overall. I think the average is at around 80 degrees or so. So we can still or actually it crashed. I cannot open Task Manager anymore, so we will get a blue screen soon. But yeah, this might pass if we just try it a second time. I think the max what this CPU can do for Cinebench under just normal water cooling is at around 49, or it was 4975 when I tried. That was with real-time priority. It is a pretty good result, but yeah, no 5 GHz, sadly. So this CPU isn't among the very best ones out there. So when it comes to the memory overclocking, the new Skylake X CPUs seem to have very good IMC. So I did various tests, and the best daily configuration I managed to achieve was 4200 MHz with 17, 1880, 28 command rate 2. 4200 is very nice result for quad channel memory, and this is fully stable in HCI Memtest with full capacity. So 31.5 gigabytes is being used as what can be seen in Task Manager. First I tried this with 1.45 set DRAM voltage, and it failed after 28 gigabytes of memory being used. Then I first raised the DRAM voltage to 1.5, and it actually went worse. Then it failed straight away after like 12 gigabytes or so. And now I'm using 1.4 volts, and it's fully stable in HEI memtest as well as Hyper-PI 32M. So this shows that high memory voltage doesn't always mean better stability. So and now I'm using 4-active window of 16 and cache write latency of 12. All the the second timings are pretty nice overall, like write recovery time of 10, RAS to RAS delay 6 and 4, and so on. The third timings are at auto. So now I could go back into the BIOS and even try to go lower on the third timings, but this is already a good enough result. I tried 4400 multiplier, but it doesn't even post. It gives weird like E8 debug, so I don't think it will work with any timing configuration or voltage. If you happen to get amazing IMC and you have the newer A2 PCB Samsung VDI sticks, then you might get the 4400 multiplier working. I also tried 16, 17, 17 timings with the same speed, and it wasn't stable in HEI memtest even with 1.55 DRAM voltage, so I didn't try that further. But this is already good enough result. HEI memtest is very good. When the whole capacity is tested, we can pretty safely say that this is daily stable. All the 9 windows of HEI memtest are error-free. I have to use 9 windows of them, as I don't have the paid version of the software, so I can only test 3.5 gigabytes per window or execution. So that's pretty much for the memory. So I think now we can do the VRM testing and then get on to a conclusion. So now I have been running Prime 95 26.6 for quite a while now. The CPU is running 4.7 GHz on all cores and threads with 1.25 set vCore and 1.9 on the input. It's measuring at around 1.925 real, and the CPU temperatures are ranging from like high 60s to mid 80s. The E-Elite CPU temperature is measuring based on the hardest core, but E-Elite is saying that PWM or the VRM temperature is only at 52. That is not correct. I can tell you it is higher. We can see that on the debug LED itself. So if we take a look at the board itself, we can see that the debug LED is measuring 90 degrees. So that is very hot temperature. Of course, I have been running this for quite a while now, so this resembles like very long like rendering situation or similar. But yeah, it is very hot. I'm running the VRM heatsink fans at the maximum speed. So if I didn't have them running at all, aka have the board in totally passive mode, the VRMs would go over 100 degrees very fast. So yeah, it is not easy to keep the VRMs cool with the high core count Skylake X CPUs. If we measure with infrared thermometer, this part of the heatsink isn't that hot, so it is not conducting heat that well. So like the chokes and the vCore capacitors, they were actually very warm to touch, so they are like near 70 degrees or so. I also have the backside heatsink mounted on the backside of the motherboard, so Yeah, these are quite warm temperatures, so if I did have this fan blowing towards the socket area and the heatsink, the VRMs would be like 20 degrees cooler what they are now. So it is very wise to aim some direct airflow towards the socket area and the heatsink assembly when you have all this mounted in a case. I'm not fully sure how much the CPU is pulling right now, but the highest core count CPUs like a 16 or 18 core, they really can draw a lot of power. My guess is between 500 and 600 watts just for the CPU alone. So yeah, that is really a lot for just CPU. So it is good that EVGA decided to add those fans, even though they are quite loud when they are running at the maximum speed. But really these temperatures are very high, so you can use them if you want. And well, if you only have the CPU running at stock, then you can disable them. But yeah, this overall heatsink assembly is quite good, although it is not conducting heat that much on this part of the heatsink. But yeah, so I think from here we can just wrap it up all in a conclusion. Well, it went slightly better than I originally expected. So the 9980XE managed to do a slightly better multi-core overclock than the original 7980XE that I had, although the difference wasn't that huge. So the 7980XE did around 4.9 GHz for Cinebench with over 1.3 volts, but quite barely, and for like 5 GHz without hyperthreading for 3D Mark Vantage. And the 9980XE did the best screen that I got from Cinebench was 4975. I really wanted to get that 5 GHz barrier broken, but it didn't want to go on just normal ambient based water cooling, so we will see how well it will do on LM2. But I really think that this whole Skylake X refresh CPU launch is useless. The CPUs aren't any different from the original product SKUs like the 7980XE. It is just a small increase in the stock frequencies and a soldered IHS instead of using paste. And when compared to liquid metal, there's no real gain when we talk about air or water overclocking. But of course, it is slightly better than the normal thermal paste Intel uses, and then you don't have to void your warranty, at least on the paper. So that way it is good. But yeah, the dark could handle the 9980XE well, although even on the dark the VRM temperatures did go quite high, quite fast when I ran Prime 95 for some time. So I really think that it was wise for EVGA to add these small fans, although they are quite loud. When you run them at high speed, it is still good that they are there as an option, so you can run them, and they are like a backup safety if the temperatures really go bad. But even with them, the temperatures were quite high after some time, so it is still wise to put some active airflow around the whole socket area and the heatsink assembly. The memory overclocking results were also great. So 4200 stable quad channel with good timing, so 17, 18, 18, 28 command rate 2 with quite tight sub timings like 4 active window of 16, cache write latency of 12, and it wasn't causing any issues in HEIMM test when tested with full capacity, so I'm sure it could do even tighter. When we talk about 12, 11, 11 performance, the 9980XE could do like 3900 plus. 4000 was quite on the edge, so it is not the best Skylake X CPU I've had in terms of IMC. The best one has been the 7920X, which did 4133 with 12, 11, 11 timings in something like Geekbench on this particular motherboard. So the dark can definitely handle very high memory configurations. It's more about the limit on the CPU IMCs themselves. So if you happen to find a golden IMC and you have the like newer A2 PCB Samsung BDI sticks, you should be able to get that 4400 multiplier to post. So that will be really amazing result, but 4200 is already very good. Not all of the X299 motherboards can do that. If you really want to buy one of these CPUs, I really don't like the pricing on these CPUs, especially now. Even the 7980XE is still at the same price, so you can buy either of the two for roughly the same price, and the 32 core Threadripper is lower than these. But if you really decide to buy one of the Skylake X refresh CPUs or any of the older ones, you really should consider the dark as one option, as all of the X299 motherboards are expensive. None of them are cheap, like under 200 euros or that. All of them are expensive. Even the Rampage 6 Apex is over 400 euros. ASRock X299 OC formula is over 400 euros. Although you might find the OC formula for slightly under 400 in some places, but they are all expensive. So the dark is around 500, but it is still cheaper than some boards like Rampage 6 Extreme, and then you get the awesome EVGA warranty policies, direct support, and so on. So yeah, definitely consider the dark. But yeah, if you like this video, please like and share it, and subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.